Namaste. Welcome to my podcast. Today I'm going to address a subject which was long overdue. As Hindus who stay in majority Hindu areas, we actually don't know the feeling of what it is to be a minority. Now, I know some in the right wing will say, why are you looking at people as groups? Isn't that a leftist thing? After all, we are all supposed to be individuals. Yes, I agree. Ideally, we should be treated as individuals. But does that happen considering our social reality? Even in a society that claims to be fiercely individualistic like the United States of America, we have people addressing themselves as Irish Americans, Italian Americans, Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, etc. Isn't that also clinging on to some kind of a sub-identity? Maybe clinging on to a identity and sub-identities is an evolutionary trait. Anyways, to get back to the main point, in our case in India, Kashmiri Hindus have a unique position. They are someone who have faced the horror of living as a suppressed minority. Now, no matter what a non-Kashmiri Hindu says, we never truly understand the psychology of a Kashmiri Hindu. Just think about it. What all they had to go through. I remember reading this book that I had bought at a Kashmiri Hindu book sale called Kashmir Documentation, and it was a collection of the letters documenting the horror faced by the Kashmiri Hindus. I can tell you after that, that after reading, I think it was half of the book that I had stopped. I simply could not continue. Now, if I can't even complete a book that documents the horror, imagine what people who have faced it personally or who have family members who faced it personally must be going through. So today I try to talk about this and a few other subjects with Ashish Dhar. Ashish, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kushal. Thank you for having me.
So Ashish, to begin with, I would request you to tell the listeners a bit about yourself. So what do you do, your background? So go ahead.
Yeah, like you've just introduced me. So I am a Kashmiri Hindu, and naturally I come from Kashmir, and I've been staying in Delhi for the last 27 years. In 1990, my family moved from Kashmir to Delhi. By education, I am a mechanical engineer. So I spent a significant part of my adult life in Tamil Nadu, where I finished my engineering from, and then I worked for some more time there before I moved back to Delhi. Uh, then I worked in the mechanical engineering industry for some time, with some automotive companies, and did a little bit of consulting, management consulting. And finally, I thought that it is a good time to jump into entrepreneurship, which is when I started a travel company, which was primarily focused on adventure travel. And as luck would have it, finally, that company, I moved on from that company and started another company called Pragyata, which is what I do currently. So I'm the co-founder of this website called Pragyata, which is basically an online platform for dedicated to the goal of revival of Indic knowledge systems.
Cool. So to begin with, now my first question to you is, which I obviously spoke about in my monologue also. So tell me what exactly, so we can start with say 85, 86, or you want to take it a little bit behind that. So what exactly is it to be a Kashmiri Hindu in Kashmir? I mean, क्या होता क्या है उधर? What is the psychology? How do you feel?
देखो अभी तो if you talk about the current crop of Kashmiri Hindus who still reside in Kashmir, it's a very, very, very small number. So you can almost like count it on your. You can draw up a list and say that these are the people. It would run into thousands maybe. So these guys, I don't have a first-hand experience of how they go about living their lives currently, but I can make some educated guesses because a lot of them, are somehow related. It's a very small community, so you know people. So right now, it's a very sad scene. You live in a state where your identity itself is in threat, and you always toe the line of the separatists or the terrorists because your very life is in danger if you speak otherwise. So whatever sound bites or whatever information that you get from the valley on behalf of Kashmiri Pandits right now is not a very reliable sort of information. But that's not. I think that's not the intent of your question anyway. What you're talking about is how did we, when Kashmiri Pandits were there in larger numbers, how did we go about living? So I think a lot of that has already been written about, and but for the benefit of your listeners, uh, Kashmiri Pandits were less than about 5% of the population of the valley, and 5% may be I may be erring on the higher side. It's a very different sort of experience to live in a society which is dominated by Islamic ethos. Uh, you mentioned in the beginning that uh, y- that people wouldn't be able to imagine how a person from a minority feels living uh, in a country or in a state which is dominated and by people who belong to another religion or another ethnic group. Uh, that is true, but the gap or this contrast is accentuated if the majority happens to be Islamic, because it's a very different society out there. You have to bend, and you have to bend over backwards in order to live safely in such a society. So when we talk about the Kashmir of the 80s, although on the surface everything was fine, there was tourism, there were films being shot there, and a lot of people used to come from overseas, and even domestic tourists used to come to Kashmir, and everyone had a rosy picture. But there were small things that people wouldn't notice. At a superficial glance, you wouldn't notice what is happening to how the local Hindus are living there. For example, if you would go to buy a vegetable from the local street vendor, so the person next to you might be a Muslim, and he would charge one rate to a Muslim and another rate to you. And if you protest, they would say that just आपको लेना है तो लो, नहीं लेना तो दिमाग मत खाओ. That kind of discrimination was always there, and that sort of hatred is very deep rooted. It's a worldview. It's the worldview of Islam does not permit dignity to a kafir. So that was very deeply entrenched in Kashmiri society, and this was something that was going on for generations. And there were variations, like after independence, after India gained independence, and after Kashmir acceded to India, there was a period when all this was not very apparent, because even Kashmiri Muslims who'd been traditionally uneducated and and a little backward, they also got educated. They enrolled into colleges, universities, became doctors and engineers and professionals. And so for a time, as they would say, and as we would say now, कि विकास ने चीज़ों को दबा दिया. जो डिफरेंसेस थी, जो कल्चरल इश्यूज थे, वो साइड हो गए. बट they were always there in some way or the other. But after, let's say about in the late 80s, when when these guys got empowered with weapons from outside, with money coming in from Saudi and from and militia coming in from Afghanistan and stuff, and Pakistan actively promoting violence against the Indian state, then things just got completely out of control. And that is when people actually started feeling for their lives, for the welfare of their families, and that's why the exodus ultimately happened.
So to summarize what you've said, 2 3 points come to my head. So if you're a polytheist or a Hindu or a pagan or whatever word we want to use it, living under Islamic rule, while they would ideally want to eliminate you completely, but considering international pressure, they would keep you alive like museum pieces, pretty much.
Yes, I think that's an apt description. So one of the slogans in the movement for what they call Azadi was Raliv, Tsaliv ya Galiv, which means Raliv, this is a Kashmiri slogan, which means that either you convert, that is Raliv, you mix up with us, you convert, or you
Mm-hmm.
get lost, or you die. So the options were pretty clear. I mean, there is no doubt about what the message to Kashmiri Hindus was. So that's what an Islam dominated society. That's how they would treat any minority. It's not just about Kashmiri Hindus or Yazidis in the recent example. It's anywhere. I mean, it's just a rule. Minorities will not survive in a Islam-dominated society. I mean, it could have periods of stability, but eventually it will proceed to the state that Kashmir did.
So I feel awkward even asking you this question, but so how did you guys escape? I mean, what happened exactly? I mean, because I was reading, like I said in the start, I read this book. I couldn't even complete it, Kashmir documentation. So it was so hard for me to complete that book. Now, how did you guys get out of there?
Yeah, so what really happened was that, I mean, till 86 things were all right, but in 1986 there were riots. Not riots. Riots are two-way. But there was basically a very explicit expression of jihad in one of the towns in Kashmir called Anantnag, which was even then referred to as Islamabad. Now it is in popular parlance called Islamabad. The
Hmm.
original name of the town is Anantnag, and it
Mm-hmm.
was then that cleric by the name of some Mir Qasim. I don't exactly recall his name right now, but what he did was that he slaughtered a cow in the middle of the town, thus declaring the intent that jihad is now underway, and therefore, Hindus are in trouble if they don't convert or leave. Uh, but since Anantnag was not a big city, it made news within Kashmir, and in any case, in the 80s, the media was controlled by the state, and the people outside the state, or people even outside the valley, even in Jammu, did not hear a whimper about this. Uh, but there were a lot of people who fled from Anantnag and moved to Srinagar. So that was the start of this phase of violence that continues to this day, uh, and and gradually things started getting worse and worse till up to about 89, when my own grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she died in a bomb blast.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
and even then, I mean, that was in March 1989, and even then, you know, it's the classic case of the frog in the beaker syndrome, where things, when they move gradually, when things change gradually, you don't realize the enormity and the significance of the change. So we were still there even after my grandmother was killed. We never thought about leaving the valley because it was our home for you know for thousands of years. Um but 1 year later, roughly 1 year later, in January 1990, uh, what happened was that all the mosques in the valley, they played the same tape. So it was bloody well organized, this whole movement, and they played the tapes. They synchronized the tapes so well that all the loudspeakers were blaring the same message, which was to the effect of just get lost or die, Indian dogs go back, and all that, rhetoric against India and threats, open threats uh, to Hindus, and there were people on the streets, common people on the streets. It's not like, normally even now you hear that there is a fringe out there in the valley who's against India, and then there is the silent majority. All that is nonsense. There were people, there were our neighbors, our people, the colleagues of my parents. Everyone was radicalized. They wanted to secede from India. They wanted to join Pakistan, and to achieve that objective, they would actively participate in these processions, demonstrate against the Indian state, fling stones. And at that time, they were even well equipped with arms. It was very common to find teenagers and people in their 20s openly carrying AK-47s in under their pheran. So all that was going on, and in January 1990, it reached sort of a crescendo when everyone was out there in the streets, and I, as a child, could actually feel that threat to my life. That I could die now. So that is very rare, for a child to feel. So that was the degree to which the jihad was explicit. It was in your face. You could just die, and you could just get killed anytime. So at that time, and that was the night when most of the Hindus decided that we could not live in the valley anymore, and we had to sort of somehow manage to leave. So one of our, my father also ran a hotel in Kashmir, and so one of the employees of the hotel, he was a Kashmiri Muslim. He helped us out with the tickets. So we had the means to purchase an air ticket, and in 2 or 3 days we fled via the plane. But there were lakhs of other people who maybe were not as affluent, and they had to leave by road and by whatever means they could. Some people actually jumped in at the backside of the lorries. They hid behind the जो सामान वामान होता है, all that, whatever was being carried by the lorries regularly, these trucks on the highway. And so somehow people escaped. And in that, I think I must mention that the Indian Army actually did play a positive role for the Hindus, which is what pricks the majority community even now, when they say that this was a conspiracy by the Indian state. It was not a conspiracy by the Indian state, but it was a sympathetic sort of accommodation by the Indian Army, that when they saw that Hindus were leaving, because there was a shoot at sight order and curfew imposed, they wouldn't stop that vehicle, and they would just say that okay, you guys leave. So because they knew that otherwise these guys would be killed, there would be a genocide. So that's how everyone left. Whatever they could find, if they could fly out, that would work, then they would take the plane. Otherwise, they would go by any other means possible.
So this kind of sounds like 1947, when Punjab or Bengal, for that matter, was basically separated, and people would just leave everything, अपना कपड़ा लत्ता सब छोड़ के जाना. So basically, what now? This might sound very stupid, but what happens to the property and the wealth that these people had accumulated? मतलब वो सब छोड़ दिया मतलब?
हाँ देखो, मतलब उस टाइम तो छोड़ दिया. So another interesting part about the exodus is that most people, and I speak for my family at least, we thought that this is just a temporary phase, and we will be back one day. We thought that we had these illusions about the power of the Indian state, that it won't allow 500,000 people to just to rot in the plains. We had no property, we had no wealth, we had no means to survive outside the state. Our only source of livelihood was deeply connected with the state. So we thought that this was a temporary phase, and eventually we would return, and so did most other people. But that thing never happened. We had to continue our stay outside Kashmir to this day. And then after about a decade, a lot of people went back. Like my father, he went back, and he somehow managed to sell off the property that we had there at throwaway prices. And the best part was that because the Muslims were aware that these guys are desperate to sell off their property, they don't know if they will get any value later on. So they were very helpful that way. They were like very hospitable and stuff, and they cooperated, and that way most of the people sold off their property at throwaway prices. So they were typically distress sales, as we call them.
Okay, now another question. Do you, in the near future, or say probably a decade down the line, and probably I think this is where we should end this segment about Kashmir. Do you see, as an individual or as a Kashmiri Hindu, do you see any hope? And if there is no hope, why? And if you believe a solution can be achieved, what is that solution?
Um I see. I think that the problem of Kashmir has become more complicated over the years, and our intelligentsia has played no mean part in complicating the problem further and in distorting the issue. So I I don't know if I can confidently say anything about what could be the solution and stuff. I am of course hopeful because my hope is a necessity. If I'm not hopeful, then I acknowledge the fact that my identity as a Kashmiri Hindu is dead. I am probably the last surviving generation which has a memory of Kashmir and its culture. And after
Hmm.
that, I don't think that with the numbers that we have, and coupled with the fact that we are scattered all over the globe, I don't think that Kashmiri Hindu culture, for all its contribution to the wider Indic and Hindu culture of India, will be able to survive. So I am hopeful. I am hopeful of returning one day, uh, but I think that it is hoping against hope. I don't think that, considering the current political situation, the way it is being handled right now, I do not think that this is that I have reasons to be any other reasons to be optimistic about it. But one of the things um that should happen, and that is the only way to go forward as far as India is concerned, is that we should stop calling this a political problem. And the government of India should officially take a stand that this is not a political problem. you know all these small details, all these small things about abrogation of article 370, changing demographics, it's easier said than done. We all know that. It's not child's play कि उठ के चले गए और article 370 abrogate कर दिया. There is a host of problems that comes with it, and even after abrogation of 370, you don't know if you will be able to address the problem of jihad. How will you change the demographics of the state? It's not so easy. uh, but what should happen is that the the problem, the description of the problem itself should be revised. And in the international community, India has a very solid rationale to present this as a problem of terrorism, of Islamic terrorism, as opposed to a political problem, or which they seek to solve via dialogue with Pakistan. So all that should be over, and you have 500,000 people as a sample, as an example of what happened in Kashmir. This is a living proof of your narrative, and I don't have any clue why this is not being pushed. So if the government of India is serious about solving the Kashmir problem, or at least making a headway and getting an upper hand in negotiations with the enemy, and in setting the narrative in the international fora, then the only way to go forward is to present the problem as a problem of jihad, and to show the plight of Kashmiri Hindus as they survive outside the valley, and why they are not able to go back.
I couldn't agree more with you. In fact, I always say this that sometimes I write on Facebook. I say demography matters, and someone just said, "Oh, this is just a communal post. Why do you think demography matters?" I was like, anytime you have doubts about whether demography matters or not, you should go and talk to a Kashmiri Hindu. That's what basically I tell them.
Oh, totally, totally. See, I think that it is astonishing that the memory or the collective memory of a non-Kashmiri Hindu. Forget about Kashmiri Hindus for a while. Uh, the Punjabi Hindu. Take a Punjabi Hindu who's come from Pakistan, right? Now, it is astonishing to me when I talk to my neighbors. I live in a Punjabi-dominated area in Delhi, and when I talk to people of my generation who are basically, just descendants of the generation which actually saw the partition, uh, there is just no idea. They have no idea of what happened during the partition, and this completely amazes me because here is here is a community that got uprooted from their soil and got thrown across the border, and they suffered so much, and they built themselves from the start, and now they sing these songs to secularism and all that without realizing that, that their own family history would tell them so much about the farce that is playing out on Hindus, that they wouldn't have to look further. But as I said, it is astonishing.
No, I agree with you. As a Punjabi Hindu, at least when we were growing up, I remember my Dadaji telling me stories about the partition. Although my Dadaji and our family was pretty much based in Mumbai, but we are Punjabis from Amritsar. So Punjabis who live in Amritsar have a very, special emotion when it comes to Pakistan. But I wanted to ask you a separate question. What has happened to these certain Kashmiri Pandits who are pro Azad Kashmir or who toe a very weird line? उनको किसने काटा है?
यार ऐसे ना दो तीन कैटेगरीज हैं, तो मैंने इसको बहुत ज़्यादा थॉट नहीं दिया है इसको, क्योंकि these guys are not worth wasting your time over. But yeah, मैंने, I mean, this is so jarring a phenomenon that you inevitably you tend to think about it. So एक दो कैटेगरीज की बात करूँगा. There is one types which is, who are born outside Kashmir. So they were too young, or they were born just after the migration, the exodus happened, and these guys have no real idea about what really happened with their parents and with their family, but they've had a decent education, and because of this cultural obsession with getting your kids educated, and अच्छा पढ़ाई अच्छी होनी चाहिए and all that, so they've gone to the best of universities and colleges, and have done decently for themselves in their life. So they don't really understand कि कश्मीर में क्या था क्या नहीं, and the typical Hindu trait of चलता है, and just ठीक है यार चलो आगे देखते हैं. So that has sort of not give. I wouldn't blame them. They have no idea of what has happened, and they just pontificate based on inputs from the liberal media and all that. तो एक तो ऐसी category है. Then there is another category which is totally co-opted. These are the people like, if I can take names, these are people like Sanjay Kak, who made the Jashn-e-Azadi फिल्म. ये तो टट्टू हैं, ये लोग तो अब ये टेररिस्ट्स के और मुजाहिदों के टट्टू हैं. इनको पैसे भी मिलते हैं, इनको आईएसआई भी पैसे देता है, एंड दे आर ऑल फॉर they are the quintessential breaking India forces, working against Indian interest in some way. So I mean, their motivations are very simple. They're just frustrated individuals, and basically who are working just for earning fame and money via dubious means. So inke bare mein. But the most interesting ones are people who've actually seen all this, who've gone through the torture of jihad and exodus, and yet somehow speak about all this in very flowery language. Now my theory is that either they suffer from Stockholm syndrome, that you start sympathizing with your tormentor itself, or more probably, or I mean, it could be a combination. You could have some people of that kind, and but a wider majority of these guys subscribe to what Thomas Sowell calls the vision of the anointed. So according to them, they are like, they have this very innate belief that they are superior, and that they can, they have a very they have this additional burden of educating the rest of the society about high ideals and and social science jargon. And so they're typically in journalism, or they've studied from somewhere like Columbia University and stuff like that, and then they think that they have a broader vision of society and all that, and therefore they can pontificate and tell you that, oh, it was not that, it's not like that. So, and because all these universities, especially the American universities, they're so dominated by leftist thought and cultural Marxism, that they get indoctrinated, and they are educated out of their own experience. So I think that's what happens to them.
So in short, उल्लू के पट्टे हैं.
ये बेस्ट डिस्क्रिप्शन है.
नहीं, मगर मेरे को एक समझ नहीं पड़ता है कि मतलब कैसे तुम्हारे को पता नहीं क्या लोगों को काट के रखा हुआ है. और सबसे अजीब बात है, आप ये देखो कि लेफ्ट का पूरा फंडा होता है ऑपरेशन ओलंपिक्स, कि भाई कौन ओप्रेस्ड है, कौन विक्टिम है. भाई कभी यहाँ पे भी देख लो हिंदुओं को जिनकी ठोकी हुई है, वो क्यों नहीं आते
यार? वो उनके विजन में ही नहीं आते हैं. वो तो मतलब द लेफ्ट इज compulsively tuned to look at society in a majority versus minority scenario. And honestly speaking, leftist thought is quite it's not very deep, it's very shallow. They don't go beyond cliches, they don't go beyond what they've been taught in their universities. So there is a serious lack of deep thinking, especially in the contemporary left. They're just वो जैसे बाप दादा की पैसे पे बहुत लोग ऐश करते हैं ना, वैसे ही वो मार्क्स और जो उस जनरेशन के लेफ्ट जो उनके आइडियोलॉग्स हैं, उनके बेसिस पे वो अपनी रोजी रोटी कमा रहे हैं. दे आर नॉट रियली थिंकर्स, एंड दैट इज विजिबल ऑल अक्रॉस द मीडिया. द मीडिया इज लेफ्ट डोमिनेटेड. आई मीन द काइंड ऑफ डिस्कोर्स दैट यू सी इन द मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया, द साइट्स लाइक स्क्रोल एंड वायर, मतलब यार तुम कोई भोंदू भी होगा ना, वो पढ़ लेगा, थोड़ा बहुत ग्राउंडिंग होगी ना उसको इंडिक ट्रेडिशन में, तो वो बता देगा कि यार ये क्या प्रोपेगेंडा है, क्या बकवास है. सो ये जो बीमारी है ये लेफ्टिस्ट की, वो मेजॉरिटी वर्सेस माइनॉरिटी को देखने की, तो उसमें ये कभी ये नहीं सोचते कि भाई देयर इज़ अ कॉन्टेक्स्ट अकॉर्डिंग टू विच यू लुक. मतलब अगर आप देखोगे एक रीजन में, फॉर एग्जांपल इफ़ यू लुक एट केराना फॉर एग्जांपल, और माल्डा, तो माल्डा इज़ अ रीजन वेयर मुस्लिम्स आर इन मेजॉरिटी. So that in itself is a problem for the Hindus who live there. So even though Bengal as a state, West Bengal as a state might have Hindus in majority, but you have a large area within that state which has Hindus in minority. So that's a subsection. And वहाँ पे लोगों के साथ क्या गुजरेगी वो तुम कैसे analyze करोगे? So वो उनके पैराडाइम में नहीं है. दे कांट थिंक लाइक दैट. सो आई थिंक दिस इज अ बीमारी, दिस इज एन अफ्लिक्शन दैट हैज इन्फेक्टेड देयर माइंड्स, कि यू हैव टू ऑब्सेसिवली लुक एट थिंग्स एज मेजॉरिटी वर्सेस माइनॉरिटी एट अ लेवल ऑफ द कंट्री, एंड उसके बियॉन्ड एनालिसिस होता ही नहीं है. तो वो तो थॉट की बात है. बट आई थिंक मोर इम्पॉर्टेंटली, आई थिंक दिस होल बिजनेस, what you call the human rights industry, so that goes beyond just ideology, that goes beyond just the way people think. ये cognitive नहीं है. It is also about who pulls the strings, who has the money. Ultimately we live in a world, if you look at the global scenario, we live in a world where we Hindus are in a minority, and in an increasingly transparent porous border type world, जहाँ पे trade पे इतना focus है, जहाँ पे where one country determines the policies of another in order to facilitate trade. So in such a globalized world, the real minority is the Hindu, right? We have just one place, that is India, which we can call our own, and we are 1/6 of the world's population roughly, and that's about it. And the rest of them are you have Christians and Muslims who are in greater numbers and who control the world. So that is something that does not work for them, because all these human rights organizations, all these जो ये chest beating activists, they all come from the same ecosystem where they are indoctrinated, where they are taught, and then where they are given cushy jobs and comfortable life to to spread this narrative and to peddle the nonsense that we know as leftist bullshit.
I always feel bad for the homosexuals, because Islam has kind of put them off the main top chart of Operation Olympics. Now they have to fight against these guys within their own community.
This is so funny यार. मतलब these homosexuals जो है, any sort of, even I'm saying homosexuals छोड़ो, वो तो sexual minority है, even communists themselves, they are the first victims of a society which turns Islamic. So this is a very, very, I mean, this is a classic case of strange bedfellows, but ultimately you know which bedfellow will kill whom. तो ये clear है.
The funniest thing recently, I think last week, वॉशिंगटन में एक गे मार्च हो रही थी. तो मतलब हाउ द लेफ्ट फंक्शंस. आजकल रेस वायलेंस अमेरिका में ज़्यादा है, तो आजकल वो ब्लैक लाइव्स मैटर का थोड़ा, वो जिसको बोलते हैं ना, स्लॉट मशीन पे चांसेस ऑफ विनिंग ज़्यादा हो गए हैं. तो वो लोग मार्च कर रहे थे, बेचारे इनोसेंट लोग, होमोसेक्सुअल्स. वो ब्लैक लाइव्स मैटर आके उनको उनकी मार्च बंद करा दी उन्होंने. बोला नहीं ऑपरेशन ओलंपिक्स, हम लोग तुमसे ज़्यादा ऑपरेशन.
ये तो वहाँ पे बहुत कुछ हो रहा है. अगर उनकी यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में रिसेंटली आई वाज जस्ट I just saw that lecture by Professor Jordan Peterson. Such an inspiring lecture about what is that, but at the same time so depressing, because the kind of forces that he's fighting and people like him are fighting is just mind numbing. I mean, these guys who, like recently when Professor Makarand Paranjpe, when he went to for a tour in the US, he was his lecture had to be cancelled at the last moment because someone, कोई दलित एक्टिविस्ट वहाँ पे यूएस में आके दलित एक्टिविस्ट अपनी छाती पीटने लगा कि ये तो मतलब दिस गाय इज फासिस्ट हिंदू. अरे भाई, मतलब मकरंद परांजपे जैसा आदमी, गांधीयन आदमी है वो यार. मतलब ही इज अ सेल्फ अवाउड declared Gandhian and you call him a fascist. This guy is not even a कट्टर हिंदू यार. मतलब मेरे जैसा कोई होगा जाहिल जो ये बोले मंदिर वहीं बनाएंगे तो तुम उस पर ये इल्ज़ाम लगा लो. पर यार ये आदमी तो इतना स्वाव, इतना रिफाइंड है, and you're telling you're calling him a fascist and all that. तो ये this disease is has taken deep roots in American universities, and I think that is where the source of all of this is. I saw another lecture by Jonathan Haidt, in which he's talking about this problem. It's I would urge your listeners to actually go and do a search of this lecture by John Haidt, in which he talks about the problem of the problem of what the university holds as a sacred value, whether it is truth or whether it is social justice.
Oh yeah,
right?
I remember that.
So yeah, so I mean, if you're pursuing social justice as opposed to truth, then your whole approach to education changes. You are not looking for the real thing, no? I mean, you're not looking for objectivity at all. And if you have given up objectivity in your academic pursuit, then what is the point? I mean, it's so absurd. And this also, I mean, in his lecture he talks about this Greek concept of telos. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but that's
telos.
Yeah. So telos. So he talks about telos, which is that the basic function of an entity. Like the telos of a university is truth. The telos of activism is social justice. The telos of a factory is producing goods, like that. So it is very similar to the idea of dharma in Bhagavad Gita, for example, when Shri Krishna tells Arjun that it is better to be mediocre at your own dharma rather than trying to excel in someone else's dharma. So this is profound, so I think this captures the problem with leftist domination beautifully, this whole idea of telos and sacred values and dharma.
Yeah, this is the exact message that, as a Nirishwarwadi, I always, when I meet, young budding atheists in India, I always tell them, कि you will never find solace in a very Abrahamized, West-leaning atheism, because it was basically created in a negation of a particular thought system. So at least be original when you try to negate something.
Oh yes, totally, totally. I mean, I think there's a huge difference between what what is called as atheism and what is called as Nirishwarvad. They start from totally different premises, and they end with different conclusions. Atheism is negationist. It is always adversarial. It is always, it always fights the theists, while Nirishwarvad has a dialogue with Ishwarvadis. So that's a critical difference.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I tried to do last time when I spoke to Nitin Sridhar when we had that conversation. And in fact, by the end of the conversation, I told this very basic point that this is the reason why I do this. That why might not I might not agree with anything Nitin says as a Charvak, but I am ready to accept his point of view as another valid way of looking at the truth. At the end of the day, we are all using truth claims. That's all it is. These are all truth claims.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, I think overall, if you look at Indic thought, at the risk of oversimplification, I can say that the purpose of any school of Indic thought is to ultimately go beyond thought. I mean, when you look at the Sankhya Darshan, so uh, it's not a theistic school, and yet it has profound things to say about how the universe functions, and it is not a belief system. It is open to experimentation. It invites you to to take up that sadhana, and sadhana is not necessarily in pursuit of God. It is in pursuit of truth, whatever it may be. So, like I said, I mean, we could just keep going on this, but the fact is that there is a distinct, there is a very stark difference between Nirishwarvad and atheism, and it is it is for their own good if atheists, at least from India, know more about their own tradition, and in that way discover themselves rather than just follow this new craze about new atheists and whatever nonsense they say.
Yeah, I see. I basically categorize atheism in India into three categories. One is the Marxist atheism. These are proper Marxists, and you'll find them in JNU and Tata Institute of Social Sciences. But the majority of skeptics, I would not like to use the word atheist here, are basically what I call wannabe atheists or wannabe skeptics. I mean, they don't find proper answers in Astika or whatever sampradayas, darshanas that they look at, and then they look at Dawkins or Hitchens. Not that I have a problem with Dawkins or Hitchens. I think they were great. They are great thinkers. Hitchens was, or Dawkins is. But the point is, I personally categorize myself in the third category. I'm obviously a skeptic, but I am based in the Hindu system of the six pramanas, and I'm not someone who's like a Charvak who will say only Pratyaksh and I will not look at any other pramana. I will look at other pramanas, but obviously, like the Charvak school said, Pratyaksh is the most valid way. But now that we are on Indic thought systems, so I would like to connect this with your new venture, Pragyata. So why don't you tell us a bit about what Pragyata is and what you guys do in Pragyata?
Yeah, so Pragyata is right now it's a web-based sort of e-learning uh, platform where people can go log in and take courses on on a particular aspect of Indic knowledge systems. So it's basically conceived of as a MOOC, a massive online open courses sort of platform, on the lines of edX or Coursera. Uh, but its focus is exclusively Indic thought. So by Indic knowledge systems, we mean any knowledge that has originated from India or has to do with with the Indian civilization. So it could be music, it could be any dance form, it could be painting, it could be philosophy, any of the darshanas, it could be your history, so on and so forth. So, and yeah, of course, the Yoga Shastra being one of the most important contributions, at least most relevant in the current times. So that's what we do, and we also have a magazine section where we look at, where we get contributions from people who are grounded in the Indic tradition and who look at contemporary events, contemporary issues through an Indic lens, or not even necessarily through an Indic lens, but basically present an original perspective on things. So that's the two parts that we are currently working on. We also want to eventually get into travel, maybe eventually have even a university that has Indic thought as the baseline, as the core, as part of the core curriculum, along with other stuff. So that's what Pragyata is about.
So, as of now, could you explain a few projects that you guys have done so that the listeners have like a tangible idea about what you guys have achieved?
Yeah. So before I go into that, I'll just explain the difficulties that we had when we started off. When we built, when we actually jumped into this project, we thought that, by we I mean myself and a couple of other people, Vinayak and Shraddha. So we're just three people working on this team, and then we have investors who supported us. When we started off on the project, we thought of it as, like I said, it's like Coursera in its functioning. So we thought that we would concentrate on the technical part, on the technology bit, and on the marketing, and on reaching out to people, while the content would come on its own. Because we were very unfamiliar with the ecosystem of Indic scholars. How many are there, how they exist, कैसे काम करते हैं, कहाँ करते हैं. तो we didn't have any clue. Basically we were all engineers, तो हमें ये सब नहीं पता था. But when we started working on this, we realized कि यार ये तो this is in complete shambles. You have people working, absolutely brilliant people, some of them geniuses, working in complete isolation, with no support from the academia, with no support from the state, and they're waging heroic, lonely battles against time to preserve the best of the Indic traditions that they know of, and it's just the tip of the iceberg that has been preserved currently. So there was no way in which people would automatically, populating the website with content became the bigger challenge than actually having a good website and a functional website. So we started off with what was the most easily available, which was courses on Indic art forms. Courses on tabla, sitar, Bharatnatyam, all that, and then a few courses on Hatha Yoga. People, as in English they call it yoga. तो योगा पे बहुत सारे कोर्स हमने कर लिए जल्दी, जितने हमें मिल सके. Some of them we acquired from already existing labels, and some we shot from scratch. So we populated the website, and then slowly we got into the more the more philosophical parts, and also about history. We got in touch with scholars like Professor Kapil Kapoor, Professor Bharat Gupt, with Dr. Konrad Elst, all these luminaries of Indic studies from the academia, and then also some traditional teachers like in the Chinmaya mission. So we are yet to start working with them, but so we started looking out for experts in these domains. So the kind of courses that we currently have are mostly to do with art forms and with Hatha Yoga, but in time we will expand this catalog, and we also have a few courses on Kashmir Shaivism, for example. So wherever we found people who could deliver lectures and get sort of introduce people to these aspects of Indic thought, we took the opportunity and built the course. So there was no method except the fact that what was available.
Okay, so do you guys have any future plans to have like online courses? Let's say if I wanted to, train myself, I'm not saying at a very master's level, but what if somebody wanted to know at least if not all the darshanas, but at least three major Astika darshanas. Do you guys have any plan to have like a YouTube course material where people can subscribe, pay for that, and then get online courses?
Already have, like, we have the basic introductory course to Vedant, Advait Vedant, by a very young person called Uddhav, who's shot with us. So he lived at the Coimbatore ashram of Swami Dayanand Saraswati for some time, and from there he got initiated into Vedanta, and then he lectures in campuses and in corporate settings and all that, and then so we got in touch with him and we did this course with him. So it's a good understanding at the basic overview of Advait Vedanta. Likewise, for all darshanas, we will eventually certainly have the courses, and that's what we want to do. That is what we exist for as a platform. And but there's an important distinction that that we keep reminding ourselves about, which is that we do not believe that a knowledge form like Kashmir Shaivism, for example, can be taught over the internet. It's simply impossible. It requires a very, very long interaction, a two-way interaction between Guru and Shishya, which is our traditional way of teaching and learning. And without that, it is not possible to make progress, genuine progress in the knowledge form itself. You cannot be a man of knowledge or a woman of knowledge of Kashmir Shaivism without being initiated by a genuine guru. But our purpose is more humble. We know our limitations. We know the limitations of the medium, and therefore our purpose is to introduce people to the system in an give them an intellectual understanding of what these systems are about, and then they can seek out and if they are lucky, they will find their guru in this lifetime. So the purpose is that we don't pretend to be a spiritual platform. We are an intellectual platform.
Well, that's good to hear, because in a country, and I say this, I know it's going to offend a lot of people. I mean, we've become a country where mediocrity is the norm now. So it's good to hear that people like you are doing this kind of real intellectual work. And I hope you guys have a good course on Cārvāka too.
Oh, absolutely. Cārvāka will be there. I mean, and if you can take that course, since you are a Cārvāka yourself, so we would be extremely happy to facilitate that.
मेरे को बोल दोगे करने को, तो लोगों के मन में इतने डाउट आ जाएंगे कि लोग गालियां देंगे तुमको. See, I'll tell you, I've always been very open about my skepticism, but what I have seen, and I don't want to talk about it, but I have seen a new trend in India where Hindus are becoming very Abrahamic, where I never thought that Hindus would be very Abrahamic in their, I've, of late in the last 4-5 years, I've come across people who tell me, अब भगवान में नहीं मानते? मतलब हाँ, तो क्या हो गया? तो फिर आपको बुरा और अच्छा कैसे पता चलता है?
हेलो, हाँ कुशल. No, it didn't switch off. There was this recent controversy over that CNN's show Believer and their depiction of Aghoris, right? You might have noticed the controversy.
Yeah.
So I noticed that Hindus, they were over anxious and eager to throw Aghoris under the bus. So they were like distancing themselves from this exoticness, this perceived exoticness of their own culture, and they were like saying, oh nahi, ye to fringe hai, ye to aise hai, without actually trying to understand what Aghoris really stand for, what is their way of life, what is their basic ethic and philosophy of life, and why are they the way they are. I mean, that is the least that you would expect a Hindu to do. You can understand that Reza Aslan comes with an agenda or whatever, and CNN, looks at it as some animals in the zoo. That's fine. I mean, that's what we've grown up with. That we've seen for the last so many centuries. But right, I mean, today, if if an average Hindu talks like that, then it is extremely disappointing, uh, because this just goes to show that you have completely adopted an alien lens to look at yourself. You do not have the confidence of standing your ground and of presenting yourself, or of even thinking about yourself without the support of, uh, you know, without borrowing ideas from others about who you are. So that is an alarming situation, and that sort of has great implications on a lot of things, on the politics, on the way we look at our history, on our very future as a as a nation.
So I guess this is a very good reason for you guys to, have Pragyata then.
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, shortly after that controversy happened, so we published a piece by an anonymous writer who's actually an Aghori himself, and he wrote a piece that dispelled all the myths that were being propagated, and it was very well received. And I was really surprised by the kind of reception that it got. We are a small outlet yet. We don't even have money to promote our posts, but the way it went viral was really a very encouraging sign. And so there is always hope, that was the silver lining for us in this case.
So on that note, Ashish, we've touched the 1 hour mark, and as the listeners always complained that my podcasts are too long, so I guess we'll have to cut it over here. Ashish, I'm really grateful to you. It was a pleasure talking to you, and guys, प्लीज़ सपोर्ट प्रज्ञता. थोड़ा खर्चा करने की आदत डालो, कभी कभी अपनी चीज़ों को भी सीख लिया करो. एंड थैंक्स अ लॉट आशीष.
Thank you so much, Kushal. Thank you for having me, and it was a great pleasure to have this conversation.
टेक केयर.
All right, bye bye.